Okay. Okie dokies, artichokes. Okay. Primary and secondary emotions. So, first things first. Emotions, we get one of two messages about emotions in our culture, to be very reductionistic about it. The first version is emotions are bad, they will lead you astray. Your rationality will get you to where you want to go. Suppress your emotions, yeah. Huh? And now we understand why we have this message. Who here has done things they regret under the influence of emotions? Like, right?
And good things.
And good things, yeah. But there is, I mean, we even fall into it sometimes. If you're talking to a friend, it's like, I think you need to just put your emotions aside on this right now and think this through carefully, right? I mean, we've all given that advice to a friend, okay? Having said that, there's a repressive police that goes to, right, where you can't express emotions, you can't trust them. Yeah. So mostly in California, I'm not sure. I got a good chuckle out of the Australians when I said this. I don't know how much this is happening in Australia, but on the other end of the spectrum is all emotions all the time. There are no bad ones. Always make room for all of them all the time. Right? This is sort of the bataka bat version of emotions, right? If you've got anger, get your bataka bat out and whack something, right? Oh, it's a therapeutic thing that you can hit things with and not be afraid of breaking, but it gives a satisfying thunk. Your couch or pillows or whatever that sort of thing.
Sounds like an art technique, like batik.
Yeah, bataka. Maybe it's a 70s thing. Having said that, I mean, we get it's a correction to the repression thing, but it's got its own problems, right? Have you ever been in a relationship with someone and they were just saying, these are just my feelings, right? Mm-hmm. But you felt like it wasn't, something about that wasn't useful. Mm-hmm. The teachings on primary and secondary emotions is a correction to both of what these things are trying to address. The reality is that neuroscientists now know that you need emotions for cognition at all, right? To tell this is gray, that we're in a group of people, that it's light outside. These all have a lot of different processing elements, including emotional ones. And without the emotional processing ones, we know that cognition in many ways gets diminished. Particularly when it comes to social interactions. Without our emotions, we're essentially kind of blind, right? In a way, right? Certainly to be able to recognize and react to fear, to react and respond to pain, to bond. It's big in the bonding emotions, right? With our kids and therefore each other as well. Okay, so emotions aren't just a nice, lovely extra thing to have. Oh, it's nice to feel in love or to feel pleasure at eating a chocolate ice cream. It's actually critical for to have wisdom, right? Yeah. So therefore, we need a better approach than just all emotions all the time or repress them. And this is the middle way. So from Love's Hidden Symmetry, remember my Bible, pages, and I've resent this out to you, just these pages, and I just want to quote a few things.
What pages are they?
224 to 225 and following. Primary feelings, by the way, I want to just start off by saying, for those of you with a psychology background, there are definitions in generic psychology and in clinical psychology for primary and secondary emotions that are not the same as Bert Hellinger's. And so this is often confusing to people. In psychology, they talk about primary feelings are anger, fear, et cetera, and other feelings are secondary feelings. In Hellinger's framework, You can have a primary guilt and a secondary guilt, a primary sadness and a secondary sadness, a primary love and a secondary love, okay? So I just want to name that right up front. For those of you who may have that background, just put that aside. It's regrettable that he used the same language as psychology when he's actually saying something a little bit different. Primary feelings are simple and don't require elaborate descriptions. For this reason, although they can be exciting and intense, they bring a sense of assurance and calm. The main difference between primary and secondary feelings is that primary feelings support constructive action, while secondary feelings consume energy that could otherwise support change. Feelings that produce effective action strengthen people, while feelings that hinder effective action or justify not action or substitute for effective action all weaken people. The primary function of secondary feelings is to convince others that one cannot take effective action. You'll notice I have these like, wow. Over here, I have an arg as I recognize myself in the paragraph. These little stars, wow, here's another wow over here. Many people have the idea that when they give in to their need or to an urgent feeling, they lose control, but that isn't true. When you give into a primary feeling, for example, to the primary pain of separation, justified rage, deep longing, or reaching out, and when you completely trust the feeling, then there's a natural control in the feeling and in the need itself. Yeah. Primary feelings only go as far as is good. Now, this is really key stuff. You won't do anything shameful if you're feeling a primary feeling, because the feeling itself has a very precise shame boundary. I'm bouncing around, Guy.
Yeah.
It's extremely rare that anyone is mocked or scorned for displaying a primary feeling. Secondary feelings don't have the same shame boundary, and it's quite possible to make a fool of yourself when expressing secondary feelings. You can't trust secondary feelings to take care of you. This is what ended up coming up in that wacky constellation I was talking about. Secondary feelings do have a certain fascination. They're dramatic, exciting, and give it an illusion of being alive. But the price of such aliveness is that people must stay weak and helpless. Okay. And there's more. He's really, really good on this stuff. I'm not going to go into this in great depth because I did a whole weekend on this, but my own sense of the matter then, as I thought more about this, because he doesn't really go into the space, although Ursula Franca, In the Mind's Eye, I have the book, but Jane Peterson also has this specific excerpt on her website on primary and secondary feelings. So Jane's website is www, by the way, it's a great website to go to. She's got, like, if you ever, like, you need grounding in the basics, or you have a client that you, or a student that you want to send to the basics, she's like got a bunch of little basic things that are perfect. So Human Systems Institute.com. This is Jane Peterson's website.
Not Ursula Franca.
Yeah. On it, she has an article by Ursula Franca on primary and secondary feelings.
Okay.
Okay. I recommend you read this because in there she makes a connection between secondary. I had already made the connection between secondary emotions and trauma. She explicitly works out the connection between secondary emotions and an interrupted reach.
Wow.
It's really simple and beautifully stated in about half a dozen pages. That's not the title of the article, but it's in the title as excerpted. It's actually from her book, In the Mind's Eye. But if you go to Jane Peterson's site, humansystemsinstitute.com, go to our resources and articles, you'll find this article on primary and secondary emotions.
It's called In the Mind's Eye.
That's the name of the book. I'm
By
saying
Jane
go to
Peterson.
Ursula Franca on primary and secondary emotions, and you will find that.
Thank you. I'm sorry.
It's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. You'll find it.
Okay. It just could have been a little quicker.
Just go to articles and resources on Jane Peterson's website, humansystemsinstitute.com, and look for Ursula Franca's article. And then you may be tempted to buy the whole book. For those of you who know anything about trauma, right? How do you know you're dealing with a trauma rather than just something really bad that you're having a memory of, right? It's that reliving and repeating thing, right? So a vet hears a truck backfire and they are back in, right, in war. They can't make the distinction. This is what happens to us, right? When we're having that trauma response, we're back in. And secondary feelings do the same thing. They cycle. It's an Ouroboros. It always sort of ends up where you started. It cycles. If you're ever in a constellation, maybe last night there was a little bit of this, the sense of it just cycles and cycles and cycles and cycles and cycles. Yeah? Whereas primary feelings come, do their job, and go. Whatever the job is. Now, if it's grieving the loss of a spouse, we could be talking about 6 months or a year. Don't get me wrong. Yeah. Yeah. And in a sense, it's also lifelong. But it has a sense of when the grief shows up again, it's doing something. Yeah.
So are you relating trauma responses to secondary feelings?
Yes. So secondary feelings are, the sentence came to me in a moment, are the loyalty feelings towards the trauma without the clarifying love. It kind of goes, this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened. Now, that's not at the level of consciousness. Whatever you're having in the moment is you're reacting to the grocery clerk or whatever current moment you're having, right? But the cycling feelings are a loyalty expression of the trauma, and they won't stop because to stop means to get disloyal to the event. Either your own or the ancestral one, since we're in a constellation space here. It doesn't have to be your own experience. It can be the Holocaust, it can be slavery, it can be the Armenian genocide, it can be whatever. Yeah. So this is my conviction, is that constellations, to the degree that you do them in the space of primary feelings, will be effective. And to the degree that they're done in secondary feelings, they're going to be really hard. Okay? It's almost, the more you stay in secondary feelings, the more you will stay in secondary feelings, in a sense, right? Now, secondary feelings are going to pop up. This is inevitable. It's not like they're not going to. Otherwise, there's probably no issue at stake, right? But it's how you as the facilitator role model coping with secondary feelings and leading the group into primary feelings, yeah, that will make the difference between a constellation that more or less feels like it's got some flow and a constellation that feels like treading through molasses.
This is really good. So constellations done on primary feelings will work, did you say?
They'll flow more.
Will flow.
They'll be way easier for you, which is what we want, right?
Mm-hmm.
And more satisfying to the client and more satisfying for the representatives. Wow, we just grieved the dead of World War II. That's awesome. I feel great now, right? I'll share a concrete example of this. I was getting to some unbelievable roles, and I ended up as the mother of a client in Australia. And for a moment, the facilitators represented something, and they kind of banished me to a corner. And I spent about I'm very resourceful now, but still, you know how it is. And I was in there kind of spinning and letting myself be ignored. And then finally they came back to me. Dan and Emily, they do what I call the kitchen sink constellations. They throw everything in. We had the Cultural Revolution. We had everything. When they finally came back to me, they were asking me what was going on, but I'd had this silencing experience. And in the role, I couldn't kind of get over the sense of the system, aka the facilitators, but not the facilitators, the system doesn't want to hear from me. And so I was whispering. And I had come through with a meaning, which was, the women stay silent so the children can live. And people further than right here, they couldn't hear me, right? I was packed with representatives. And they were going, what is she saying? What is she saying? She needs to speak up. She needs to speak up. And I was like, the women stay silent so the children can live. What is she saying? They were just, and I finally just went, the women stay silent so the children can live. And everybody started crying. We were in the primary feeling. We were in it. We were in the primary feeling. And you can feel it, right? And it wasn't like out of control and I wasn't scary, but we were in the primary feeling. I felt so purified after that constellation. I cannot tell you how good I felt after that constellation. After suffering a fair bit for a while, but you know.
Yeah.
There's a primary and a secondary. I wanted to say this when we were having the conversation about no's. There's secondary no's. I don't want to. I'm not liking this. I don't, you know, various versions of that. And there's just like, you know what? I think I'm not going to represent in this constellation, but I really look forward to seeing what you guys do. Right? Right? Mm-hmm. We're going to do a little exercise. A guy did a little exercise that I have related to this, where I don't know what his situation was that he posed, but one representative for the secondary feelings was literally on the ground, like hitting the ground and kind of doing wow, wow. And the other one who was representing his primary feelings in the situation was just going, it's not my fault. So this is the secondary version of it's not my fault. It's not my fault, it's not my fault. And then there's the primary version. The content isn't actually necessarily different. Mm-hmm. It's the energy of it and whether it's got some movement, yeah, or whether it's got this, and you might as well say, it's not my fault and it'll never end and I can't ever make it stop, is the full statement. Whereas here it's just, it's not my fault, right?
Did you say there was a representation for secondary feelings and primary?
Yeah, this is the exercise we're going to do later.
Oh, okay. So
it's just like kind of a little contrived exercise.
Could be like a move if we can't get to it, because I think the whole point is to move from secondary to primary.
Right, this was just this exercise is for, you're going to think of a situation, my cluttered closet, whatever your situation is, you're going to have a representative for your secondary feelings about the situation and your primary feelings about the situation for you just to see the difference.
Okay, but can you use it in the constellation?
You might.
If you can't get
sure.
to primary.
Oh, yeah. Hey, whatever Hail Mary you can come to. I'm lost. There's no primary feelings. Let's bring in a representative for the primary feelings in the situation and cross our fingers and see if it works. However, a few tips around this. So you may be going, how to do all this. First, you need to start with yourself. This is the most important thing. You need to lead from your primary emotions. If you're interviewing or facilitating from a place of your secondary emotions, it will be very hard to lead the rest of the group, right? Now, this does not mean having perfect feelings. That's probably secondary anyway. Perfectionism is really secondary most of the time, right? But if you're feeling performance anxiety, have a primary relationship with it. If you're feeling cranky with your client, have a primary relationship with that crankiness. If you're tired, have a primary relationship with that. A lot of technologies are out there for moving from secondary to primary feelings. You know them. Mindfulness does this. NVC, nonviolent communications, does this. EFT has got a bit around this.
Primary, secondary feeling.
No, about the move.
About moving from secondary to primary, although it's not articulated that way. I'm just saying that there's stuff out there that, one of the things I said throughout the workshop that I did on this is that I'm about to tell you things that you already know and do, you just don't have names and distinctions for them, right? Bert Hellinger won't work with you if you're not in your primary feelings. It's just like the end of the story. He will send you from the stage. So you better show up in your primary feelings if you want to work with Bert Hellinger. Now, we don't have these kinds of, rules. Watch out. But he also, in a very simple, like he just, when the client sits up here, so comes up the stage, 800 people, right? The client sits down next to Bert Hellinger. Bert Hellinger is silent for 3 or 4 minutes. I mean, a while. 9 times out of 10, by the end of that silence, that person is in their primary feelings.
Totally.
Right? It's magic. You and I don't quite have the weight to pull that off. Although silence is a great, is often, I mean, silence can also just keep a place where somebody spins. But he's a genius at this, to the point of harshness, and I want to say a word about that. Most of the brilliant facilitators you watch do an interview are unconsciously but skillfully helping the client to access their primary emotions. These questions that you may have seen me role modeled a little bit, and I'm going to talk more about them a little bit later, but things like, if you could describe the problem to a 5-year-old and he or she could understand it, how would you say it? This is a nifty trick for getting somebody into their primary feelings. Or just really simple, what's the ouch? Because people show up and, I'm codependent and with my mother, and I'm like, but you can't do that because that would break rapport. So I'll get to more about that. Observe secondary and primary emotions and know the difference. Just go through your life. Just going, my friend's in a secondary emotion, my friend's in a primary emotion. Notice it in yourself. Constellation, this gets back to whichever one of you guys in the corner, since I've got you mixed up, said something, said constellation rituals and preparation will help you get into your primary emotions. As I've mentioned, one of the things that I do on my drive to my Rudramandir constellations, because I've already interviewed them, so I already have a relationship with their system, is I just tee up their system, their ancestry, and I notice if I have any reactions. Yeah, like, some crankiness or some worry or fear, or I'm judging one of the ancestors or anything, any kind of reaction other than, I look forward to getting to know them better. And I do some bowing. I just do whatever I need to do to get back into some neutrality and primary feelings about it. Attending to your entanglements with your client comes under the same rubric. Just when you notice you're reacting, right? If you notice you're reacting, it's something for you to take some time with and use your tools, mindfulness tools, NVC tools, whatever tools. You guys got tools by now. I know that you have tools. Notice your reactions in the moment and having a way to deal with that. The simplest version of this, that could be a whole class, is if you're having a reaction that you don't like, let's go with the one I don't like the most, which is I'm cranky with a representative or a client. I'm wishing they wouldn't act like that. Look at your reaction. It's your reaction. I'm not talking about the behavior out here that I'm reacting to. I'm talking about my reaction. Find a way to include it. Like, I'm having that reaction. I'm having that reaction. How human of me. Remember, what you resist persists. And if you can't do this, if you like, I can't include that feeling, bad me. Okay, not including, that's the actual experience. Include that. that I include that I can't include this crankiness. Oh, that feels better already.
Would you include that like verbally and externally with?
Well, if you're in the middle of a constellation, it may be hard to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do it inside.
Do it inside. Most of you, if you practice this in your lives enough, this is the main, practice this in your lives, then you'll be able to do a little maneuver of consciousness, just a little boop, and you'll have access to it. For me, the speed of this movement and getting into right relationship with what's going on for me is highly motivated by my commitment to professionalism. Part of being professional is not about getting lost in your stuff. So having a way to wrangle your stuff kind of like this, yeah? And you can't do it if you're not doing the preparation and taking care of yourself and looking at your stuff outside, blah, blah, blah. But when I'm in the constellation itself and I'm starting to have reactions that I know are not useful, even when they're completely, I can like objectively say, yeah, what that person's doing is pretty annoying, right? It's still part of my professionalism is to show up dealing with my stuff, right? So for me, this is very useful motivation. For you, you may have other motivation, but for me, this really helps me, right?
And when you're in that professionalism, are you in primary feelings?
I try to start out in primary feelings and stay in primary feelings, but when I drop out, I do this including thing and get myself back into primary. There's no way to stay in them all the time.
Right.
I got as much trauma as the next girl,
Right.
right? Yeah. Just and again, that essential friendliness with it. No, I got as much trauma as the next girl, right? Okay. And then some of you in your, I'm just noticing I'm really hungry, so if I'm biting into an apple. If you're needing to do that too, feel free to do that. I should have eaten during the break. Some of you during the process of sharing with me your goals and learnings for the course talked about noticing your projections, which is part of what more the language of entanglements was used last night, but projections and entanglements. The more you are in your primary emotions in your life and as practitioners, the less you're going to have to worry about the question of your projections. It's just not going to come up as much. They will arise less, and you will have greater resourcefulness, curiosity, and clarity in dealing with them when they do. And they will. Yeah. An ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure, right? Okay. The client. How to help the client be in their primary feelings. First, they need a serious, this is from Bert Hellinger. This is one of the reasons why he will banish someone from the stage.
That seems traumatizing in itself.
It's terrible. Although some people, again, it's like it was the best thing that ever happened to me. It got me out of my bullshit, and, you know, right?
Oh, I'm an asshole. Okay.
Well, it's related to this first one, which is he insists that the client have a serious relationship with the issue, and be serious about it. If they show up and they're kind of, I think about suicide sometime, but who doesn't? You know, that's right. Because people get nervous and they get into their secondary emotions and whatever. And you know, theoretically, someone could be sent from the stage, and you go, you know what? I've been a dick about this issue my whole life. It taught me that, you know. So for some people, it could be helpful. But putting that aside, helping the client have a serious relationship with the issue, and having a sense for when they're not bringing up something that's truly weighty. You know, as someone once joked, you don't use constellations to figure out what to order on your menu that night, as much as you may be feeling really indecisive about it. It should have some serious relationship with the issue. More relevant to your clients who are probably not going to show up with that is that you can kind of tell that they're kind of not naming the issue. And then we don't banish them or, you know, whatever. We just help them find the real issue, right? Again, I'm going to keep coming back to this over and over and over and over again. It addresses some of this harshness potential. You just don't want to, you are not in your primary feelings about this. I will not work with you.
Yeah.
Some of that funny harshness that can show up in constellation sometimes is that. So if you can remember to pace, and then lead. And then go back to pacing. Yeah? Stay in rapport. Don't disrespect the client's secondary emotions, but help them move out of it. That they're in their weight with the issue, again, different from, I think about suicide sometimes instead of like, suicide is they're in their weight about the issue. This is a tricky one. And it came up a little bit last night in your reports about it. They are willing to be guided, but without abandoning their agency. Now that's a balancing act. If you've ever been a client, right? How do you let yourself be guided, but without just turning the facilitator into a parent, essentially, without giving up all agency? And as a practitioner then, how do you communicate to the client, this is what was happening with that person last weekend. She just wasn't going to let me guide her. It was off the table. I could tell. So how do you communicate to them? You need to let me play a role in guiding you after all. That's why you're hiring me. But to continue to invite their agency in the process as well. There have been some moments in some of the constellations I've seen facilitated here where there was some question around whether the facilitator had given up too much of the leadership role to the client, right? That was more on the first weekend. Yeah, it's a balancing act. Staying the guide, staying the leader in the process while the client retains their agency and ability to say, what they need to say. Yeah. And there's no, again, this is the art now. This is the art form here. This is not the rule book. Yeah.
Yeah, the art form. So when I think about bringing up issues that are weighty, that really do have weight and, are not light, I think I relate them to issues that are trauma and don't have answers and have been circular, and can't break out.
Yeah.
And that feels like the weighty stuff.
It is.
So, but then that sounds like the secondary description, and then you're not in the right emotional frame to do the work.
It's not your job as the client to set yourself up with your primary feelings. Having said that, if you want to take responsibility for that when going to a facilitator, so let me be really clear. Trauma, so we have trauma, leads to secondary feelings, which are a bit of a trap. That's why it's trauma, not just a bad thing that happened, right? However, the whole thing still has primary feelings. So let's say one has the trauma of losing a parent. Let's just say that one, at a young age. The secondary feeling version of that is continuously through life having the experience of being re-abandoned in relationships, by teachers, right? That's a version of it that could show up, right? And people always leave me. People are always leaving me. And that's a really good issue that someone could bring to you, right? I seem to be a person that everybody leaves. And I'm really upset by it. I don't know why. Is there something wrong with me? Is there something wrong with them? You can feel the spin, right? But behind it is, I got my heart broken when I was 4 when my dad died, and I've never gotten over it. Right? Now, someone may come to you with, I got my heart broken when I was 4 years old when my dad died, and I never gotten over it. They can come to you with a primary feeling. That doesn't mean there isn't something still to be done about it. They just gotten access to the primary feeling about it. Or they may come to you with a secondary feeling and you're going to help them to the primary feeling about it.
When you described Bert Hellinger's process, and I realized that he may be like his own special case.
Oh, yeah.
It seemed like if you weren't already in the primary, you were not going to be worked with.
That's true for Bert Hellinger.
But then when you describe this process, it's like, yeah, we recognize that the secondary feelings are where the weight is, and we need to coach and guide them into the primary.
We need to do that.
So that we can do the work.
Yeah. I'm not offering up Bert Hellinger as a role model in this regard.
Mm-hmm.
What I am saying, just one second, is that there is a cultural, this gets us into another topic for just briefly. You are all doing culture making in your constellation circles. And when he has 800 people in a room, he's doing culture making as well. So basically, by the time people come up in the chair, they are almost already here. And people, there are subtle belonging cues that if you're not coming up here with this, you might not want to come up. So he's pre-selecting. I'm not offering that as a model. Don't get me wrong. Having said that, if you can help the client move from here to here in the interview before you start the constellation, you are so far ahead of the curve.
Right.
If you start the constellation in here, again, it's that molasses thing. Okay? So really, if you can help the client get there before you start setting up representatives, you're just helping you and them and everybody. Yes.
So I think if I heard you, Christina, what I think I heard is maybe like the differentiation between weights and like heavy feelings. Like, so you mentioned the weightiness of the secondary feelings, but I think what I wrote down, what I think I'm understanding is like primary feelings is when you're in your proper weight.
Yeah.
Not heavy feelings, like, or weighted feelings. Like the secondary feelings are going to feel heavy and crazy
Right.
and big, but you're out of your weight when you're in them, from the constellation term of weight. Which is more like when you're in your dignity and all of that stuff. I wasn't sure if that was.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
You had just mentioned, like, again, with the example of Bert Hellinger, he's not going to work with you if you don't bring something up that's weighty.
Right.
You know?
Right.
And then, I'm thinking like, well, and I guess weighty and heavy, that's maybe like tricky distinction.
When you're in your proper weight about something is different from heavy feelings or like a secondary, like my understanding of this is like a secondary feeling is, it's like if you're out of rapport with it, or if you're like the joking about suicide, for example, like you're not in proper weight of it, is not the same as, you could also be like spinning and heavy and dramatic about the pain and the trauma, and that's also out of your weight. That's also like not as weighted as being in your primary feelings about the trauma.
Right. And I just want to name, we're mixing some terms here. When I use the word weighty, I am probably meaning more like substantial. There is a technical word here, to be in your proper weight, which we've talked to it, which is like, it's kind of like being in your proper dignity with something. But all I really mean when I say come and bring something weighty is bring something that matters.
Yeah, that's how I heard
Is
it.
really all I mean by that.
That was my.
And you want to help them get into their proper weight with respect to the problem if you can.
And that's the thing is, I don't necessarily expect a client to come to me and already have, worked
God, no.
into the primary emotions.
Oh God, no.
And be in their proper weight,
No, these are all tips for helping your client move here. I'm sorry, I'm spitting apple.
That's okay.
Okay, absolutely. No. This is why they need help. It's why they're stuck into choosing guys who keep dumping them, right? If they figured it out, if they properly grieved their dad already, yeah. Okay, good. And then, so that just covers the last bit. In the interview, they're in pace, lead ways you can help them. A classic one is they're talking about the boyfriends and blah, blah, blah. And then you say, so what about your parents or something like that? And yeah, my dad died, but mom was really critical. And I'm like, what's that thing about your dad? What happened with your dad? And I'm like, ouch. even just you having a bit of the feeling with them is going to help them move into the feeling a bit more. Yeah. Okay. And part of it is that they're testing you in a good way, in an understandable way, whether you can handle their primary feelings. What they don't know is that everyone would prefer to hang out with their primary feelings, because secondary feelings get to be a bit of a bore. Ursula Frank is great on this, because she's a psychotherapist. And she's like, these are the times when you get irritated with the client and you want to fire them and they're driving you nuts. And I'm like, oh, way to tell the honest truth here, Ursula. But she's 50 minutes every week, week in, week out. So she's got a slightly different context here. But it's beautifully written. Okay, representatives. So this is also relevant to last night, right? Okay, so here is a summary of representatives, that your goal. Neither too invested in helping the client, nor too invested in their own experience. If they're trying to save the client, or they're trying to do work for themselves too much, a little bit is fine. Yeah, we're all there to be of service, right? I tell people straight out, I guarantee $5 worth of healing for everybody in the room, right? But if the weightedness of this is too much towards helping the client, which means they start to, or too invested in their own experience. Again, same as the client, willingness to take guidance from the facilitator and the group, while again not abandoning all agency. Again, it's a balancing act, right? Now, this is something I've noticed about representatives generally. New representatives, and all of us, usually in short order, find ourselves feeling very loyal to the role.
Say that again.
In short order, find ourselves feeling very loyal to the role.
Who does?
The representative, us as a representative.
All representatives. Okay.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Loyal to the role.
Yeah. Like mom's feeling harassed and blamed and tired and not seen well, and God damn it, I'm standing by her. Right? The information is useful. The loyalty to a point is not. One of the questions Jan Jakob Stam asks us to ask is, who is your client? Now, in some circles, the client is the whole system and the family. I say balderdash. I say your client is your client. Why?
Can it be both?
It can be, well, obviously, you have, the system is connected, but when it's held up as, the client may leave feeling like crap, and I'm really in service to the whole system instead. First and foremost, my contract is with the client. I haven't made a contract with this family, with this nation, with whatever. I have an implicit contract with this person, like I have a contract with all of you as students here. Yeah. And so, yes, obviously we have to be in if we're not in support of the good movements of the system, we're not going to be in support of the client as well. Individual representations are not our clients, which may mean a representative saying, I still feel really, 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 really bad at the end of a constellation, right? Now, it will help them immensely if you say, oh, thank you so much for bringing that forth. I'm so sorry, but that's the plan. So we may have to leave this like this. And people go, cool. If you say it, that's that pace part of the pace lead, right? It really helps to just acknowledge and touch base with these pieces that you're not going to resolve. If someone is going too deeply into a role to the point where you're having a hard time facilitating. Other people are starting to get startled and worried about what we're up to. The client is not clear that there's a strong container for them anymore, or any other systemic, as in the group, sort of difficulties. You really need to help and ask the representatives to find the inner knob and turn it down in service to the work.
Mhm.
And it's very rare that people are unwilling to do this. If you do it again in a pace, lead kind of a way. Thank you for bringing through that much suffering and anguish. I'm going to invite you to turn it down to a 7. This is Francesca's phrase, because we just need the information. We don't need you to have the whole experience. The other thing I often tell the group, I'm sure some of you have heard this, is we're not here to repeat what already happened in the past. It already happened, it's done. We're trying to look for a new story here. So it's not, I remember years and years ago, one of my earliest representations was of a baby dying of liver disease. I writhed on the ground for 45 minutes. I really would have appreciated one of the facilitators coming over to me and saying, thank you for the information. You can turn that down. You know, it doesn't have to feel that bad. Now I would know to do that for myself. And I had to do that a couple times at the Australasian Intensive, just kind of turn down the roll a little bit, because it was kind of like bothering me and whatever. And then once I turned it down, I was fine. Oh,
Yeah.
this feels better. I can wait until I get the attention of the facilitator again or whatever without fully stepping out. But sometimes, especially people who are new to representing, right? Now, in terms of expressions, the first thing that most representatives have is access to the secondary feelings. This is something I've noticed over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. Really experienced representatives, and not always even them, can kind of get themselves straight to the primary feelings. But usually you start to have access to, can I just pretend we're in 2 roles for a second, Guy? It's all his fault. It's all his fault. He did it, right? Right? Now this is utterly unhelpful, right? It's useful information. Generally speaking, when people start doing back and forth between them, I interrupt that. I have to make that stop. Because then we're back into replaying rather than finding something new. And I'll turn and I'll just go, Guy, thank you for bringing that forth. I'm going to ask you to say the things you're wanting to say to her, say them to me first, so that I can help you say that in a way that'll help us move us forward. But we totally want to hear it. We want to know what you're experiencing. And then you'll say to me, I think it's all her fault. I'm like, great. And now come healing sentences. So my classic one is the representative wants to say, fuck you. Yes, God bless the Bay Area. People will just, who are taught that all feelings all the time are good.
Yeah.
It's just my feelings. Okay, yes, I got it. It's just your feelings. Fuck you. And I'm like, oh, stop. Because too much of this, here's the deal. I'm not big on the language of re-traumatization. I think it's been overused. I don't think people are that fragile. However, you have a constellation too much in secondary feelings, I think it's the one time we're actually in some danger of re-traumatization. Okay. It just spin and spin and spin and spin and spin, and the client just feels clobbered. Okay. So I really like to interrupt this very quickly. Because it lands as in a isomorphic way, in a parallel way to the original injury or the environment of the original injury. So, oh, great. I can see you're having strong feelings about him. Okay. And if I, depending upon what's going on in the system and what I know about the background, let's assume that fuck you came out in the middle of things. So it isn't the very beginning. So I have some information and I can try a healing sentence. And can you try saying this? When you left me, you broke my heart. When you left me, you broke my heart. And everyone goes, whew. right? Or they'll say, that's not quite right. And I'll go, oh, great. Is it close? Yeah, but it's not quite right. Can you fix it? Yeah.
Mm.
When I left you, it broke my heart.
Mm.
Oh. And then that's the thing I've noticed with representatives. If you only got to get them 80% of the way there.
Mm.
They could almost always, if you give them agency and permission to do this, right? You have to say, if it's not quite right, I invite you to tweak it a little bit. Every once in a while, I just say the sentence as it is. Just so I can feel it when they say it. Because sometimes once they make themselves say it, then they're like, thank you for making me say that. Because I didn't want to say that. But sometimes they'll really say, that's really not it. And you can feel it. Like they're really in touch with the role.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll say, fix it then.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll think about it. When I left you, it broke my heart. Right?
Mm.
Okay. So working with representatives can help the representatives get into the primary feelings, you stay in your primary feelings, the clients stay in the primary feelings, and the whole system stay in the primary feelings.
Mm.
Okay. Having, you like this word, Guy, having good hygiene with respect. I used it earlier and you chuckled about something else.
Oh.
About helping the group. It's not banishing secondary feelings. It's not making people wrong for having secondary feelings. It's not shaming them for having secondary feelings. It's just not letting the group hang out there too much, right? And being kind of insistent in a guide. And you can be really, really explicit. Groups love transparency. What I'm trying to do here, guys, is right now, and you're not going to say primary and secondary feelings because people aren't going to have that context, but right now what we're doing is we're kind of repeating our client's past. And I'm trying to help us find a different way. So I'm going to ask for a little cooperation here. That's usually not necessary, but if it is, then people are like, oh, I totally want to be cooperative. Totally get it, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can use those kinds of things. Because once you get more and more weight in the work, and there's a lot I don't have to say now, but there's still a lot I still have to say. I don't have the weight of a Jan Jakob Stamm or an Ursula Franke or a Stefan Hausner. You cannot, the less weight and experience you have, the more you just have to be kind of explicit with the group with what you're asking of them. And that will take the place. It's good group dynamics management just to be really transparent and invite them into, I'm going to say more about this later, co-creating the container with you. Right? And as long as they have guidance and they feel like you're handling yourself well and you're in your proper weight, then they're kind of glad to do it. It's what they showed up for. Except for the occasional, person who's got social skills problems, who's just going to be themselves, and they may end up running out of the middle, and you're like, well, I'm really sorry, this was not a good fit for them. And that happens very rarely. It just doesn't happen that often. Okay, a few more tips, and then we'll go to lunch. Again, you need rapport, pace-based lead. Without it, you can't lead the client or the reps. So you can't just shove them into primary. This is something I found really useful in interviews. I'm going to say more about this either today or tomorrow. Gently insist most of the time that the clients start from their present time need or problem, not from their family story. There are exceptions to this. They start out talking about the suicide of their father. Please don't tell them, but what relevance to the present day does this have? Right? But very frequently people, I'll pick up the phone, I'm like, what's our issue? And they'll say, well, I seem to have generations of alcoholics, and I think it may be connected to the Irish potato famine, and I'm like, whoa. Just for a moment, what's going on right now that you'd like different? And we'll see if the potato famine's connected to it. But sometimes I'll have to literally say to someone, we're not here to look at your ancestry out of mere curiosity. And again, I do that in a really friendly kind of a way, right? Because people come with all kinds of ideas about what this constellation stuff is, what it's about. They've just hit ancestry.com. they found out about their crazy Czechoslovakian ancestors and they want to find out more about them. So, what's going on now in your life that seems most important that you would like to have different? Sometimes they start out with complaints about their parents. And again, pace lead, oh, wow, that sounds really hard with your mom. Can I put that aside for just a second? What would you like different right now in your life? Right? Just so, again, we're into that something that's weighty. Remind them that the great thing about Constellations is that it offers a new story that can be liberating, so that you want information with as little pre-interpretation as possible. We're all children of Freud. Pretty much everyone in the West has a psychodynamic story about how they ended up the way they ended up. I had a controlling mother and an absent father, right? These classic stories. And what I say to them is, that's a really useful lens. It is. The gifts of Freud are innumerable. And those stories have purpose, but for whatever reason, this story has only gone so far in liberating you, and you still have this problem. So what we're curious about is whether there's another story here. So I'm going to invite you to try and just tell me the facts without any of the interpretation, which they mostly kind of can't do, but you can help them with a little bit. Because they're so used to saying, my mother was depressed because she didn't get to go to college. Right? Those kind of little psychodynamic explanations for things. Yeah. And I say they're useful. They're totally useful. But it's not the space of constellations. Constellations is generally in the space, and I'm going to talk more about this later, a big family trauma that couldn't be integrated at the time, right? That's why our interviews tend to be about wars and betrayals and perpetrations and early deaths, right? Feel the dignity of the client and the client's family and bow to its weight. If the client is stuck in neediness or victimhood, sense the element that is still missing that is making this so stuck for them.
So are we getting this list somewhere for?
No, it's being recorded, and
You're going to send that doc to us?
hadn't planned to. I don't know how useful it would be. This is my working outline.
Right.
Huh. Okay.
So your notes are
What was the most recent one that you said? Sorry.
Feel the dignity of the client's system or something.
Yeah, feel the dignity of the client and of the client's family. Bow to its weight.
Like,
If the client is stuck in neediness or victimhood, sense the element that is still missing that is making us stuck.
yeah, for some reason I had been presuming that the whole story about the Wi-Fi and the inability to print meant that had the printer been working, we would have gotten hard copies of these.
No. I would have a hard copy to read from.
Ah,
Sorry. Last weekend, I didn't hand out anything either.
okay.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I tend to treat these more like lectures that you guys are taking notes on. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
It's-
there's a lot to cut to write down.
I-
Okay. All right.
Can you just repeat the last sentence? Client stuck in neediness.
Or victimhood, sense the element that's still missing that's making us stuck. I mean, one of my presuppositions is that resistance or victimhood or neediness means something has not been included yet. Something's still missing. Now here's another one where you just, again, you have to sort of balance things. This is the art thing. Treat them with dignity. Care for their distress, but don't assume their fragility. That's really tricky. Some people you have to be more on the care for their fragility side, and some people you have to be more on the, actually getting them more in touch, getting them a little more fragile. Right? And then the last one I just want to name here, do your job. Move on to the systemics. And let the systemics do a lot of the work for you. So you could sit there, your client could explain to you, my parents always hated each other. There was no love in the family. There was no love being modeled at all. And you want to say, you know, according to Bert Hellinger, everybody is, you know, conceived in love of a type. So your parents loved each other somehow, right?
Yeah.
You could say that, or you could set up the representative for the mother and for the father and have them fall into each other's arms and say, I always loved this person, right? Not that that's necessarily going to happen. Something else will happen, but something will happen. And my experience is that whatever you might have told the client, that if they see it in the constellation, it goes in way more easily. It's like, oh, I've been taking care of my mother for the last 30 years. And that's not something they could have heard you say in a million years, but they see it in the constellation and they're like, oh my God, so burned. I got to stop doing that, right? Okay. So I have a little exercise with this that we're not going to do. But I want to invite everybody before we go off to lunch is take a second with this primary and secondary feelings material and just, you know, take a friendly look at last night for just a second. And remember, feedback, not failure.
Right.
What might you like to do differently next time? Yeah. What were the learnings? And I'm not asking you to say this out loud right now, although you can. But I just want to make sure we're actually taking the theory and bringing it back to practice. Yeah.
So can we talk about this? Because I was thinking, yeah, that's exactly what was happening with Dad. He was stuck in like a system. He felt blamed.
Yeah.
And there was the stuckness, like aggression to Dad, and Dad was feeling blamed.
Yeah.
And we couldn't move out of that place. And
Right.
so when you listen to the lecture, I was thinking about exactly that. Like, how would I do this if I was still dating? How would I move it? But it seemed like he wasn't blaming, but feeling blamed. And so I'm actually not sure. But yeah, I'm wondering.
Yeah. So, by the way, as I've said before, there's no one big resolution. There's a series of small resolutions. Mm-hmm. So you're not necessarily going to go for the big primary feeling right off the bat, right? Because pace a little bit. Mm-hmm. But what might be one small primary feeling in that experience of feeling under attack and blamed? And there's no wrong answers here because we're speaking in a somewhat generic space. I mean, you can apply it to last night, but you could apply it to other. Mm-hmm. I was not there. But what might be a first little that would communicate, we see you, there's something going on that matters, that isn't just cycling.
I think we see you is a good one.
We see you.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. And one could even invite the representative, if you're the facilitator, to say, and again, I always do this, I ask you to say this with all your dignity, no drama. I'm not feeling seen right now, and I don't know why. Right? It doesn't finish the movement. You can feel it's an intermediary movement, but it starts to create a little bit of rapport.
So if I'm blamed, I'm not seen.
It might be. It might not land.
Yeah.
Don't get, it might not be the right sentence, right?
Well, there's also the secondary feelings of the others in the constellation as well.
Right. Yeah. So
It's like the whole everybody was in the secondary feelings.
yeah.
If he feels blamed, there's somebody who blames.
Not necessarily, but there could be.
That's true.
Yeah.
It could be someone not in the room.
It could be someone not represented.
And that could be.
Yeah.
Really hard to tap. Really hard to.
Well, not so hard to tap. I mean,
Yeah.
if something's showing up really,
Yeah.
like you can feel that they're having interaction with someone. Let's say these two are here, and I'm having interaction with this role. This role is having an interaction with this role, and you as the facilitator are thinking, that's not about that person. It's being projected on the child, perhaps, that kind of thing. You might just bring in and whatever it is, this one actually has the relationship with. And I go, oh, it's not about you. It's about him. Right? So you can't literally, without knowing who even he is, you can just bring, whoever it is that Leslie's role has got mixed up with Guy's role, which happens with parents and children all the time, right? Children get projected on things from their parents, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, that's something that could have happened. Be to take the client out of the situation a little bit and put the parents together. To
Could be.
resolve some of, what happened with them before the child even became part of the system.
It might be, depending upon the unfolding of things. One of the things you always have to ask yourselves, how many turtles down are you going to go?
Yeah.
There's a bunch of different ways you can do it.
Yeah. Sometimes you really do have to deal with, Mark Wolin over and over says you need to deal with the mother bond first. I disagree with him on this point, but I take his point that the mother bond is pretty freaking primary. Sometimes just skipping one generation, just going to the grandparents can be kind of helpful. And then sometimes you had to go to the original divine female and the original divine male is actually, and it just kind of goes prehistoric, like cross time and space, or to the ancestor who's before the mess, just to bring in something new and resourceful, whatever the mess is defined as. So sometimes you have to stay really, the thing to remember about parents is the client usually has memories of the parents. So the trauma experience is linked up with memories. Whereas the trauma entanglement with a grandparent or a great-grandparent or a great-great-grandparent is not also reinforced by all the neurology of memories. So it tends to be a little easier to work with something a little. If you've got client and the parent, put on your seatbelt, because you're probably in for a ride, particularly if it was a really abusive relationship. Make sure you're kind of up for it. It's rough stuff.
Especially when you start talking about big social issues that are so much bigger than this family. It seems like going way back might be a good tool.
Sometimes,
like how was that a survival technique, before this family ever came to be?
Yeah. I had a constellation recently where we just had to name that probably all the mothers have had this experience from, for millennia because of the patriarchy. Okay. How do we acknowledge that? Right? Just, without trying to fix it. Okay. So it is 1:00. People are tired.
Need food.
Yeah, you need food. So thank you everybody for leaping in so fully. After lunch, we're gonna just do a little bit of returning to what we want to agree to in groups. I think do this little exercise because I think you would enjoy it around primary and secondary feelings. And then we'll see what's next.
Would you be available to stick around for a little bit?
Make myself finish my apple.
For our talk, do you mind if we have Leslie?
She actually asked that I just, I was going to talk to just you part of it, and then we can or not include her. But
it would be really helpful for me if Leslie's part of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So 2:30.
Oh. Well, can we use the restroom?
Yeah, restroom. Take care of yourself.
Yeah.
Jeff, you have been so quiet over there.
Yeah. There's-
Been taking it in. Trying to think.
I don't know. Is that one? Yeah. You want to go? Sure.
Do what?
Piedmont? Maybe the Greek place? If they're open?
Yeah. I'm down.
Somebody drive or?
I would say.
Yeah, you know, it looks like it could be me.
Yeah.
Also, give us more
It's
choice. Remember
cold.
last time we tried the burger.
Oh,
place and
let
they
me
had
turn
the-
this off.
We probably could have done it if we had the car.
I
Yeah,
would've
so let's go.
been